So I was looking through my DVDs trying to figure out what video to do this week, and I realized I've never reviewed a Mel Brooks movie. So we're gonna fix that. The Producers. Now, The Producers came out in 1968, was directed by Mel Brooks, also written by Mel Brooks. This was the first big movie he ever made, and it's actually a really funny and really well executed first movie. Now, there are some things in it that do give it that first movie feel. The budget is not as big. Some of the sets and staging of scenes aren't as impressive as some of his later movies, but I can kind of give all that a pass because this movie is ridiculously funny. It makes me laugh consistently from beginning to end. It's a masterpiece of subversive comedy. What's the story here? What's The Producers about? Well, I guess it's the story of Max Bialystock, this Broadway producer. He's kind of washed up. He hasn't produced a hit Broadway play in some time. His investors have dwindled to a bunch of little old ladies that he kind of coaxes his money out of through romance. And that's where you see him at the beginning of this movie. In fact, you actually catch him in the act of romancing one of these old ladies when Leo Bloom walks in as an accountant played by Gene Wilder. And I think this was Gene Wilder's first big movie role. Zero Mostel was already a big name on Broadway. People knew who he was. He was the original Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. But Gene Wilder wasn't really that famous at the time, and his role in this movie might be the funniest performance he's ever given because he's this naive, immature man-child. He still has his little blue blanket that he uses to soothe him whenever he gets overwhelmed or hysterical. And with that, he has kind of a childlike innocence that contrasts really well with Zero Mostel, who's this cynical, jaded Broadway producer. He's a bit of a crook and a scoundrel. And it is funny to see these two bounce off of each other and see Max's kind of corrupting influence on Leo, which is one way to view this movie, that, oh, Leo is this innocent accountant and he kind of accidentally comes across his money-making scheme, and then Max jumps on that, but he needs Leo's help, so he kind of corrupts this innocent guy into going along with him. However, that's not exactly how I read it, because there's a moment in this movie where, yes, Max is trying to get Leo to go along with this scheme, but Leo doesn't really want to do that because it is illegal and they would go to jail if it went sideways. And then there's this long sequence where Max is trying to convince him, trying to show him all these wonderful things that he could do if he had money and had some freedom. And then there's the scene by the fountain, which I think is one of the most important scenes in this movie because it shows that Leo does have agency. He's not just being coerced by Max to do this illegal thing. No, he takes it on himself and he rationalizes his own thought process. He talks about what he wants in life. He's sick of counting other people's money. He wants some of his own money, and he wants everything that he's ever seen in the movies. Then he finally agrees to join Max on this incredibly ill-advised scheme. So what is the scheme? Well, with Max's last play, they found out that he accidentally raised a couple $1,000s more than he needed to, but the play was a flop, so it doesn't really matter. The backers just cut it as a loss because the play didn't succeed, and so they don't need to get paid back, so Max can just pocket that extra couple $1,000s. Now, how the scheme works is if he raised, say, $1 million extra than he needed to put on the play, then he could pocket a small fortune, assuming that the play flops like the last one did, and he doesn't have to pay off all the backers. However, if the play were to succeed, then he'd have to pay off all the backers, and there's just not enough money to go around, and they go to jail. So what they have to do is find the worst play ever written, something that will not run a week, maybe even more than one performance, something that's so horrible and offensive that no one can get behind it. Make sure the director's inept and the cast is bad. Make sure everything about it is so horrible that there's not a chance that it will succeed. And that's really what most of this movie is. It's them raising the money, it's them finding the cast, the director, all these pieces, and then finally putting on the performance, hoping that it'll just be torn to shreds by the critics, it'll close, and then they just pocket all that money, go to Rio de Janeiro, and live in the lap of luxury for the rest of their lives. As far as the comedy is concerned, there's really two aspects of it that I wanted to hit on, because comedy is hard to review because at the end of the day, it just boils down to, did it make you laugh or did it not make you laugh? And this movie definitely makes me laugh. It's hilarious. And this movie has kind of two different ways that it likes to tell jokes. Half the time it's all character-based jokes because you have our two leads who are kind of larger-than-life, exaggerated characters that have a lot of leeway as far as jokes and interactions, and they're really entertaining to watch. They both nail their performances to a T. And while Gene Wilder is a legend in comedy and everything he does in this movie is great, I really want to highlight Zero Mostel for a minute because I feel like people don't recognize this performance as much as Gene Wilder, mainly because he's not really much of a household name today. He was back in 1968, but nowadays I don't think people really talk about him. And he plays this sleazy Broadway producer so well. Such a great character, because on the one hand you do sympathize with him a little bit because he is so desperate and down on his luck and he just wants a break, and you can feel the desperation in his voice. And with that, he's such a smooth talker, because Broadway producers, they're usually very eloquent. They need to be able to talk people into giving them money. So there's a certain amount of charisma there that he brings where you do kind of want to root for this guy, but at the same time, the dude is a scoundrel. He's not a good person. He's horrible. His morals are reprehensible. So as you see him develop this big project, in the back of your mind, you're kind of hoping that something goes wrong, because you want to see him get some kind of comeuppance, some kind of retribution for all the horrible things he's doing in this movie. And going back to Gene Wilder, he's kind of in the same boat, where you definitely have more sympathy for him because he does have a certain innocence about him, but at the same time, he does know what he's getting into, and he goes into it voluntarily of his own volition, and he doubles down multiple times in this movie. So even him, as innocent as he is, he's not completely innocent. So when you do see them get their comeuppance and things go wrong, it is funny because you're like, yeah, to some degree, these guys do kind of deserve it. But then there's the other side of the comedy in this movie, and this is really what the movie's known for. If anybody talks about the producers nowadays, they immediately think about this other side of it, and that's the subversive and satirical side of this movie, because the script that they ended up going with to produce is none other than Springtime for Hitler. It's a big, bombastic, musical love letter to Adolf Hitler, written by Franz Liebkind, a former Nazi living in New York. And the whole point of this play is to glorify the Third Reich and to create sympathy for them. And the whole joke around this is that it is so offensive, and there's no way anybody could put on something so obscene and in such bad taste. And there's just something so subversively hilarious when you see the curtain rise on opening day of the performance and you hear the Springtime for Hitler theme song, and it's so earnest in its Nazi propaganda kind of way. They can't help but laugh at just how offensive this is. How did anybody involved sign off on this? It's just so baffling when you see it. And before the opening number is even done, people are starting to walk out because it is just so tasteless. And then LSD comes on the stage as the Fuhrer himself. And LSD is the name of this guy, this actor in the movie that they cast as Adolf Hitler, because they wanted to get the worst possible actor to play this guy, because they wanted this play to flop so hard. So all the qualified actors that auditioned, they dismissed right out of the gate. But then this guy comes in, and he's clearly a satire of hippie culture in the late 60s. He's got this little psychedelic band behind him, and he sings this song, Love Power, and it's just so bad. And his whole performance is hilarious whenever he's on screen, and he lights up the movie. And I can't remember the actor that plays him, but for me, he always looked and sounded and even acted like a Robin Williams character. Like, if you cast Robin Williams in this movie to play this type of character and play it up and make it funny, this is exactly the performance that I would expect Robin Williams to give. So much so, before I looked it up, I actually thought that might be a really young Robin Williams as LSD. But the reason LSD works really well in this movie for me is because every time he's on screen, I can never really tell if he's supposed to be stoned or if he's just dumb. Because he kind of drifts in and out of lucidity whenever he's on screen, and he gets really paranoid sometimes, and he gets really emotional, because he goes through these waves of what look like him just tripping out, but then he'll say some things, and I'm like, oh no, you're just kind of dumb, aren't you? And the way that keeps me guessing throughout the performance is just really funny to me. And when he is in full Hitler costume, and he's on stage, and he comes out to do his big opening scene, that's actually what brings the audience back into their seats, because just like how I found his performance hilarious, the audience starts to find his performance hilarious, because it's such a bad performance, but because it's Hitler, one of history's greatest monsters, and he's played by this completely inept hippie that's just making Hitler look like a clown. Now the audience is starting to see some legit comedic value in this, so they're coming back to their seats, and they're laughing, and they're having a great time. And I feel like this movie might have invented the so bad it's good movie. So I feel like that's a term that gets thrown around a lot nowadays, and especially online when people are reviewing movies, they'll talk about guilty pleasures, so bad they're good movies like The Room or Birdemic, movies that are just so inept on every level that they're kind of hilarious to watch. And I would put Cats in that category too as a more recent example of this, but I feel like people didn't really consider movies so bad they're good until, like, I don't know, maybe the 80s with Siskel and Ebert reviewing movies. That might have been the start of it. But I don't think anybody really talked about movies in those terms back when The Producers was in development. I feel like Mel Brooks was really ahead of the game when he was writing this movie, because that's basically what he created with Springtime for Hitler, this little Broadway play within his movie that is just so bad and offensive and inept that even the audience in the movie can't help but be engrossed and laugh and enjoy it. Ironically, that's really what I enjoy the most about The Producers, and why I do keep coming back to it every so often, because it really does have something interesting to say about Broadway culture, and as an extension of that, movie culture and movie production, because the two worlds are not that different. There's a lot of overlap there, and there's a lot of things that you could see in this movie, even if you're not a huge fan of Broadway, which Mel Brooks clearly is. You can still take a lot of these ideas and apply them to the movie business, and it just becomes hilarious all over again. That being said, not every joke in this movie works. I actually found the stuff with Ulla, the secretary, to be kind of lackluster. Her jokes aren't even really that good. They're kind of one note. She actually doesn't do much in the movie. It just seems like they brought her in to fill some time, put some extra jokes in during some of the more reflective parts of the movie to break it up a little bit better. And another part of this movie that I'm sure is controversial today, a lot of people probably won't find it all that funny, is the whole thing with the director. They're looking for one of the worst directors to make this material, so they go and seek out this incredibly flamboyant director who's gay. He's clearly a stereotype and exaggeration of what a gay Broadway director would be like and act like. But at the same time, Mel Brooks knows Broadway culture, and he knows that there are quite a few people like that in Broadway, and a lot of these jokes actually aren't at the expense or punching down on this gay director. Actually, watching it again, I realized a lot of the jokes are directed towards Leo Bloom, who, like I said, is very naive, and he's being thrown into this new world, and he probably hasn't had an interaction with a gay man in his whole life. Now he's just in this situation, and he doesn't really know how to handle it. He's not really saying the right things. And so that's really where a lot of the comedy comes from. It comes from Gene Wilder being so uncomfortable in this situation, and Zara Mostel playing the good producer, really talking up the play, trying to get this director on board, saying all the right things when Leo is just completely out of his element. But to wrap up this movie, the show is a raging success. People love Springtime for Hitler. They think it's hilarious, so everyone's giving it fantastic reviews. They're saying it's gonna run forever, it's never gonna close, they're gonna make so much money. And this terrifies our leads, because now they're gonna have to go to jail, because all these old ladies are gonna want their cut of the profits, and there's just not gonna be enough profits to go around. So in a completely rational move, they try to blow up the theater, and yeah, it doesn't go exactly as planned, and they end up getting arrested anyway. So the movie does lose me a little bit, especially when they're in court and Leo gives his big speech about Max being a great influence on his life, and just pleading for a reduced sentence or something. But then the movie gets hilarious again right after that, because as soon as he's done finishing his speech, and it's very sappy, and it's the kind of speech that in a different movie the judge would listen to and it would soften his heart and he would let them go. No, not in this movie. They still go to jail, which is a great punchline to that whole speech. Then to make it funnier, they're doing the same scheme all over again from jail with all the prisoners as actors, and they got this new song, Prisoners of Love. And it's just a great little funny tag to end the movie on, to let you know that these guys have not learned their lesson, that they're still scoundrels at heart, and no amount of prison is going to change that. And that's pretty much it for The Producers. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this movie did become a Broadway play, that Mel Brooks adapted this movie to Broadway, and it was a huge hit, and I'm not at all surprised, because this original movie is hilarious. It holds up remarkably well. It makes sense that you would adapt this story into a proper musical, because there's already, I guess, 3 musical numbers in this movie already. There's Love Power, which LSD sings this is audition. There's the big showstopper Springtime for Hitler number in the middle of the movie. And then there's Prisoners of Love at the very end, with all the prisoners performing and dancing in this play that they're putting on. So already it has a bit of a musical identity to it. And the songs that they do add for the musical are good. And maybe someday I'll do a separate review of the remake that they made, because this movie is a weird case of it being adapted 3 different times. It was adapted first as a movie, then it became a play, and then they took the original cast of the play and made a movie version. I just remember it never really made me laugh all that hard, especially compared to the original producers, which is still a comedic masterpiece even all these years later. Now I turn over to you guys. What do you think about the producers? Do you like the original the best? Have you seen it on stage? Do you like what they did there? Or do you like the remake movie version that's also a musical? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.